So the other day, I was talking about RCS and how Google would really taking this issue. If they did it head first, then they would be able to make a significant game changer. Well, in that video, I also mentioned briefly about the carriers updating with Android. And I really thought about it, and I listened to also Samsung Unpacked saying how they're dedicated to 3 years of Google support. And it makes me realize how much better I miss iOS and Apple's software updates, because they don't got to answer to any carriers. They don't have to answer to nobody. Their software is their software, and they can support as many devices as they want because they have a niche on their hardware as well. And it makes me really regret to most users, because when you buy a premium flagship phone like the Note, that thing should be good for maybe 4 years. You're paying thousands of dollars for the most premium experience you can have on an Android, but you're only going to get 3 years of software changes, and then you'll get security patches. And that kind of stinks, because an iPhone 6 is still supported. Well, 6S realistically. And the fact that a 5-year-old phone is still getting iOS updates versus the newest and greatest can only go 3 years, that's a shame. And I think Android software support sucks. But that's not necessarily on anybody. That's mostly a couple of people you have to blame. The first people you got to blame is the carriers. Why in God's name do the carriers have a say in the software updates is beyond me. I think that was a big mistake that Google made, trying to rely on the carriers to update. That's a big mistake on its own. That should never have happened. You don't need carriers to rely on software updates. Unlocked devices, I think everybody should be going for. When you buy an Android, go unlocked. You'll get the update straight from the manufacturer, the OEM. The next people you got to blame is Google. They can make it for their products, but then they got to push it out to other companies that have their own skins and their own thing. But the problem with that is the companies are the next to blame. But Google also times out the release, and then the company gets them, and that's who the next person you have to blame. Because either they don't have the optimization or they can't handle their devices, but then that kind of shows that it's really a mix all over the place. Because take a look at Apple. Apple has iOS. They make their own software and hardware. So as a result, they're able to optimize better. They're able to push out the updates and keep them lasting longer. The problem with Android is that most of these manufacturers don't make their own hardware. The problem is simple. If they were going to update, and if they were going to make their own hardware, like Google is reporting, then you'll have a better, longer-lasting device, because you can have a say in that. But because these OEMs rely on these third parties, and they don't do these things themselves, that's why the devices stink. Because you won't be able to get the best, because it won't handle it. And I think that stinks for most people, because you pay thousands of dollars for a device, maybe every 1 or 2 years, and who knows, you want to keep it. Some people just say, you know what, I can go 3 years, 4 years, and you know what, if it breaks, then I'll get a new one. But just think about it. You paid thousands of dollars for a device, and it doesn't last you more than 3 years. That actually sucks. And it's kind of funny, because mid-ranges can also get that amount of software support, now that I think about it. I think Android updates are a joke, especially that you can only get 3 years versus what Apple can do, which is kind of why I prefer iOS, in my opinion. But I really think what needs to be done is that these updates, they have to optimize them better. Google has to figure out a way to keep them lasting longer on devices. The OEMs that manufacture their own smartphones need to figure out a way to keep the updates while giving new features, because 3 years on a Note 20 is unacceptable. If it was a mid-range, I can understand that. But the fact that it's a premium flagship experience and you can only go 3 years on a software update is a joke. Now listen, some of you may not agree with what I'm saying, and that's completely fine. If you're happy with 3 years software support, be my guest. If you think there are other issues and other problems, but the real people you need to blame are the carriers, Google themselves, your phone manufacturer, and that's it. Because the carriers should not have a say. Google should be able to make these software run longer for the other phones, because the packets need to be compressed. They have to be able to be easier and transferable to other devices. And then lastly, the OEMs that build the phones. You give your phone 16 gigabytes of RAM and a Snapdragon, but you can't support it up to 3 years? Wow. So I think at the end of the day, that kind of experience stings. That's why I would tell people, don't spend that kind of money if you're not going to get the most long-lasting support. You can have the best hardware, but if the software support stinks, then you're out like $1,000 plus, and then you're going to have to spend it in another couple of years. At least with the iPhones, you can go longer. So you really should think about it the next time you buy a device. Just know you're only going to get 3 years if you're an Android user. Unless, of course, sometimes you go with another company like Sony who does kind of push for a 4th year. So at least Sony is one of the difference. But you really got to think long and hard next time you get a brand new Android flagship, because that device will only last you 3 years, from Samsung at least.